You can start now.
Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning to everyone. Respected panelists, government officials, representatives of international agencies and NGOs, my fellow colleagues and researchers from home and abroad, media representatives, this is Ishrat Zakia Sultana, Assistant Professor, the Department of Political Science and Sociology, North South University, and coordinator of Center for Peace Studies. Welcome you all to the webinar on Myanmar Election 2020, Impacts on Rohingya Crisis. The webinar is hosted by Center for Policy and Governance, SIPG, at North South University. Respected panelists and audience, thank you very much for joining us today. Globally, more than 15 million people are without a nationality, and a child is born stateless every 10 minutes. While in the 21st century, statelessness is a widely discussed issue. The stateless people are among the most underreported populations, according to the UN Refugee Agency. While a case commonly known as Rohingya genocide case is being heard by the International Court of Justice, the actors of genocide still decline to call it a genocide. While voting is a globally recognized method to choose a government for the country, nearly 2.6 million as the host country of the world's largest number of Rohingya who were originated in Myanmar, Bangladesh is concerned about the impacts of the recent election in Myanmar on the Rohingya crisis. Should we be optimistic over the resumption of talks on Rohingya repatriation? Or does the exclusion of minorities in Myanmar's general election carry any significant message for us? CPS would like to address these areas of concern and generate and exchange ideas and views of scholars and practitioners to understand whether and in what ways the 8th November election in Myanmar would open up the possibilities to end the Rohingya crisis or make us aware of the steps we should take to resolve the crisis if the newly elected Myanmar government shows reluctance on this issue like before. A few words about CPS. It started its journey under SIPG through the International Conference on Rohingya Crisis in 2019 at North South University. I'm glad that some of today's panelists had joined the conference that initiated last year. CPS is a platform for academics, researchers, and practitioners from diverse backgrounds working together to create a peaceful world with a focus on sustainable and inclusive solutions for contemporary humanitarian crises. In the last few months, CPS has hosted events on the impacts of COVID-19, Rohingya crisis, the UN's 75th anniversary, SDG in post-pandemic world, etc. And based on the discussions in these events, CPS develops policy briefs and shares them with its partners and the government of Bangladesh to bring positive changes to the society. Today, we're glad to have an esteemed group of panelists from Bangladesh, Canada, and India. We are honored to have respected Vice Chancellor Professor Atikul Islam with us as the session chair. And the session is going to be moderated by Ambassador Shohidul Haq, Senior Fellow of SIPG and former Foreign Secretary of the Government of Bangladesh. Again, I welcome you all to our webinar. And without further ado, I'd like to hand over the session to the moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ishrat. My name is Shahidul Haq. I'm a fellow at the North South University. I'll be moderating this session today. Our session is chaired by Professor Atikul Islam, the Vice Chancellor of North South University. The way we thought that we will arrange is that all the panelists would be requested to make a opening remark on the subject that has been communicated to them earlier, and then we'll go to the participants, seeing what they would like the panelists to discuss and deliberate upon, and then each panelist would be given 2 minutes in the conclusion to make a concluding remark, and then the vice chancellor will make his concluding remark, and then at the end coordinator will thank all of us. uh, the way we thought that we will do it, that instead of making it a silo among the panelists, we will also welcome this time the panelists to ask questions to the other panelists, to be more interactive, and I can rest assure you that I will come on and try to energize the discussion. So let's start the discussion, and I will introduce the panelists as I go along into the session. Now, very close to our border, which I call third neighbor, Myanmar, uh, has just finished their election. We have sort of informal outcome. At this stage, may I request all the panelists to keep their cameras on, so that pictures can properly be taken instead of a name. We can have a face as well. So, and I'll go back to this just to give you a fair bit of an idea how large the exercise had been. Is that there has been 5,643 candidates in 1,119 seats. Both lower house, upper house, and subnational level. And this is a contested candidates, because 1/4 of these seats are allocated to serving military officers. So I'm giving hints. And out of that, there had been about 37 million voters, and that has left out the ethnic minorities, not only Rohingyas, but also other minorities, about 1.6 million. So that has raised questions, both in the international media and also at the level of UN, that whether this election could be called fair, free, and properly participated by all strand of people. The result that has come in looks like that NLD is going to sweep this time as well. Last time they had they had about 390 seats, both house. This time they have already indicated that that they will have 400 seats. So quite a victory of Aung San Suu Kyi and her party. And the USDP is in a very poor situation. So we will hear all this and more of it. We'll start off with Brigadier General Dr. Sakawat Hussain, who is a currently senior fellow at the SIPG. And he is also former election commissioner, rightly placed to discuss election process and outcome of Myanmar. And also he has been writing quite prolifically, 26 books in his credit. So, sir, could we hear from you how you see the election process in Myanmar and the outcome? You have about 5 minutes, and then we will come back to you again and again. Thank you. Over to you, sir. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, giving me the opening slot. At this stage, I would not talk about anything else, the consequences of the election, etc. You have asked me to talk about the electoral process in Myanmar. In fact, in Myanmar, the electoral process is almost same like us. It is majoritarian process, which you call APTP, first past the post. People directly votes of their choice candidate. As you said, you have given a lot of data, which is absolutely correct. That about 3 point, that I have written note is 38.1 million voters, and in which they have defranchised already 1.5 to 1.7 million voters, and mostly in Rakhine area. The UEC, that is Union Election Commission, was this one was set up in 2016, and this is the first election commission which was set up or which was appointed by the civilian president, and a civilian university teacher is heading. But there is a reputation of these gentlemen and the others that they are very much uh, aligned with NLD. In fact, uh, there is a uh, there is a all, of course international observation is that the election commission has been crafting out the places which are not favorable area of NLD, particularly in the state uh, elections. In that, I will draw because there are so many other places, but I will draw attention to nearer to our home. That is in the Rakhine state. The first thing that the election commission confirmed that no Rohingya is eligible to vote. What to talk of participating in election? So Rohingya, as such, those who are still in southern central Rakhine near Sitwe, it's about 200,000 people. They are not in the voter list because they're said to be not their citizen. And then they most of the it's about uh, uh, 75%, one would say, but it's about 27 of the seats out of 67, which has been the election has been cancelled. That just because this has been dominated by Arakan National Party, which is not aligned with NLD, and this has been done very deliberately by saying that that area is a conflict-prone area. Similarly, there are other areas where conflict-prone areas, as you said, 1.5 people has been defranchised. Now, interesting is these elections, as we say, by-election, this election will not take place in 2021 because the rule and the constitution is the by-election takes place 1 year after the formation of the government. So government is to be formed 21st March, as I believe, 2021. That means these elections would be somewhere in March, way after March in 2022. So these are discrimination in the whole of the electoral system. And of course, they had the advance voting for the senior citizen. That is fine. That is appreciable. Postal voting, that is appreciable. But the election commission has definitely acted as parochial, has not been very independent as far as I am concerned. So outcome was very predictable. And the USDP, the army, and the NLD, they're all Bamar majority parties. Therefore, they have excluded almost the non-Bamar citizen of the Myanmar. So this is the whole position, and the outcome is everybody knew what would be the outcome of the election because there's hardly any other party. There's hardly any other. There are 90 parties that participated, but those parties, hardly any other party which can really make any dent in NLD seats or USD or army. Of course, they have 25% reserve all over this. So this is what is the situation, and the counting is still probably going on. It's not finished yet.
Thank you very much, sir, for sharing with us in terms of the maneuvering of the NLD in the even pre-election process, and also how the National Election Commission make sure that the Arakan National Party this time does not appear as a third largest party, and that's what exactly has happened. They have lost to their own factions, which will come back later. So I would like to leave a question with you so that when we come back, you can share with us. As we know that election process itself is the heart of democracy. So when we have an election which is not fully participated, manipulated, in a majoritarian kind of an election, if I may allow to use the word, how do you then describe Myanmar democracy? So this is a question for you. I have some lethal narratives, but I'll keep it to myself to hear from you. At this stage, may I may I call upon Javed Ilam, because I think it's time that we also hear from a diaspora, Rohingya diaspora, as to how they see election in their own motherland. Javed is a lead strategist at the Canadian Rohingya Development Initiative. He is currently studying at the University of Toronto, focusing on economics and political science. I'm sure that being someone very close to the country and to the people, he will bring a very fresh, new perspective as to how they see as a diaspora this election. And unfortunately, I'm sure that he has not been able to participate in the election being abroad. So that's something we would like to hear from you. You have the floor, Mr. Javed.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to express it. As the former panelists just described, the Electoral Commission was handpicked by the NLD government itself, which was not the case in 2015. The result was, in fact, very predictable, and nobody ever questioned that any other party will even make a difference rather than, let alone majority. But from Rohingya and other minority diaspora perspective, it is worth knowing that before even going to vote, there is like a lot of systematic barrier put in place that preempt that even the stage to the voting that necessarily translate into non-voting plus discouragement plus, and for the Rohingya itself, it is like the whole disfranchisement of like the whole ethnic minority. And this was not the case in 2015, where some of the Rohingyans were able to participate. And of course, there's another part of the Burma where other Muslims minorities are facing the same. There was a particular case was a candidate who has waited 19 years just to be able to get identity documents so that he can stand for the seat. But at the last minute, he was dismissed by the most weird reasons of saying his parents were not citizens by what he was born. And so there's a lot of systematic barriers in terms of procedure, ID, and there is the case of the government systematically and intentionally outpacing the candidate in the conflict-prone area for the most arbitrary reason. This has been the case for in Shan, this has been the case in Karen State, and this has been the case in mostly with the Rakhine State as well. So it is fair in a way if you see the people right to vote in isolation as a democracy, let alone any other institutional check or balance. So it is really hard to say that it was fair in a way that there was a lot of systematic barriers put in place, kind of in a way you could say preempt a lot of biases by putting systematic barriers.
Thank you, Mr. Javed. I understand that you also feel that election hasn't been fair. This time, if you have closely monitored, in 2015, people holding card, either white card, blue card, red card, pink card, were allowed to vote. This time, when the people approached the booth along with their cards, they were not allowed, irrespective of Rakhine or Rohingya or any other minority. So that's something also I think international community should need to keep in mind when trying to give credit to so-called democracy in Myanmar. I have a question for you, and once we come back, we would like you to reflect on that, which is now that it looks like that not only 2015 but also 2020-21 election has consolidated NLD, which is not very friendly, put it mildly, to the minorities. And that's why we see that they haven't done well also in the minority region. What that diaspora brought, not only Rohingya, but rest of the minority diaspora from Myanmar is thinking of doing, what that you want to do, or you want to take it as a fait accompli and then live with it for the next election. So that's we would like to hear from you as someone who has been in that region. Now, may I request Dr. Kausar Ahmed? He is the Executive Director at the Conflict and Resilience Research Institute in Canada. He is an expert on the Rohingya issue, written a very co-authored a very good, very comprehensive book on Rohingya crisis, and he has also been participating in various peacekeeping operation as a civil monitors, if I understood from the bio properly, which is quite unique for a Bangladeshi Canadian, and he has been closely monitoring the geopolitics of the region. I think he's one of the first to write the geopolitics of the Rohingya crisis. So naturally, I would like to hear from you how you think that the current geopolitics would play out in the wake of the election in Myanmar. And I would also like you to keep, and I'm sure you'll do, is how United States election results and then China coming in would play out. So over to you, Dr. Ahmed.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's approaching midnight, so I'll be trying my best to put my thoughts and words together. And I do beg apology, an early apology, if I fail to do so, sir. So I'll quickly jump into the discussion as Ambassador Shahid very rightly put out. The dynamics of the various nations in Southeast Asia. Just to begin, I would like to draw attention for all the audiences, those who have tuned in today, of number of major news networks that carried the news of Myanmar election. So what I did over the past couple of hours, I chose from BBC, The Guardian, CNN, and Al Jazeera. So I picked up all these first pages of news that carried the title, and also finally I took a title from Myanmar Times, I mean the Myanmar government's official news outlet. And I ran a quick analysis with NVivo, and what is astonishingly, the finding is all the major Western-based news media actually titled, in their title, they use the word Aung San Suu Kyi repeatedly. And next major point came in China, and third major point came into the query is Rohingya. And of course, the Myanmar Times titled only NLD, and it just said NLD sees huge win in 2020 polls. That actually conveys an interesting position of the West, because I still see the Western media and by extension the politicians are still obsessed with Suu Kyi and her power, her comeback to the power actually, and they still think that she's going to make the change, although she defended a murderous army, as we all know, in the court of justice. So this is what is kind of a little surprising for me, that over the past 5 years, the Western obsession with Suu Kyi has not yet faded. Just to lay the background, and I would like to start with the question, as I was asked today, if Suu Kyi is the projected winner of 2020 election, as we have all gathered by now, so do we expect to see a change in Asian geopolitical environment? And my one-line response to this question is probably no. Rather, we might find a status quo unless the United States of America re-engages itself. I'll just argue quickly, and then I'll conclude my opening remarks in three ways. First, I'd like to draw attention to the security scenario in Rakhine State in general, I mean, in Myanmar in general, and particularly in Rakhine. As all of you know, at present, 21 ethnic armed organizations, and they've spent varying numbers of years fighting to replace or reform the Myanmar state and Tatmadaw. And since 2015, 10 of them signed nationwide ceasefire agreement. So far, Myanmar tried to hold 3 such meetings and conferences for bringing peace, and they have not been succeeded. But the question is, and if you go deeper into analyzing all these signatories and non-signatories of the NCA, the instrument, you will find an interesting demarcation. So the signatories to the peace treaty are mostly the armed groups mostly allied to or seeking help from India and Thailand, while the non-signatories are mostly from China. So given this dynamics, I'm quoting one of the quotation from UCIP, a reporter, a researcher quoting that if that is the situation and the continuation of ethnic armed insurgency remains in this part of the world, how peace can really be achieved in the near future. And the involvement of India and particularly China in supporting some of the groups with material support or moral support would further complicate the situation. And you have rightly heard from Ambassador Shahid that more than 25% of these votes from the ethnic minorities were not counted, especially in Rakhine. So in this part, I would like to conclude that if the security situation doesn't improve with the help of major actors in this part, the complications of geopolitics will continue in this area. The second thing I would like to bring here is the role of ASEAN members, and especially the role of big threes. So big threes are Japan, India, and China. And if I just would like to give you a stat quick here is that if you go through the numbers of foreign direct investment, you will find over the past 2 years, it has risen to the amount of $5 billion. And again, if you see the countrywide distribution, you'll see Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan, and China in this order. But if you calculate or add Hong Kong with China, then you'll find China is the largest. And within the ASEAN members, even having 2 Muslim countries, I don't foresee any major change in terms of their outlook and engagement in resolving the conflicts. And in this part, I would only like to share big 3 takeaways with regards to China. So China has set aside its stated adherence to the principles of non-interference to become more proactively and assertively involved in Myanmar peace process. Second, Myanmar considers China's engagement to be constructive overall. And finally, the Rohingya crisis has provided China an opportunity to reestablish its primacy among Myanmar's foreign relationships, attract popular support, and asserts its leadership. We also see India's proactive engagement politically and economically in Myanmar, especially in support of their Kaladan multimodal project. And it is even more interesting that Japan is also a very contending economic power, and they have invested quite a bit of money in there. And finally, with Thailand, I don't see Myanmar's relationship is going to worsen because there is a like-minded group ruling both the countries of Thailand and Myanmar. Finally, as with regards to the Western states, we try to amalgamate all of them into an international community, but it is a very fuzzy group, as I always say, because each country has their own objectives. For example, Canada, it has declared its support with Netherlands to continue its participation in the Court of Justice, but it's very difficult to see how it goes. And UK, I don't see any positive involvement here.
We will come back to. We will come back to you, Dr. Kausar. Thank you for bringing in the geopolitics into the equation. Let me also then leave a question with you. You have rightly pointed out there were 3 things prominently featured out in the international media: Aung San Suu Kyi, China, and the Rohingya. So let's focus on Aung San Suu Kyi. Lately, there has been a debate that is the in terms of democracy, is the individual important or the process important? A group of sociologists and political scientists are saying it is often the individual in the absence of a long-standing process, even in UK. So if you take that theory for a while and put Aung San Suu Kyi into that, it's a very interesting hypothesis. I would like to hear from you. As I've been lately reading The Lady and the Generals Aung San Suu Kyi, and seen how he grew up being one of the family member of a military establishment, and he's always felt. In fact, on one occasion, the writer says that she told him when he was in at home in Myanmar, saying that I always wanted to be a military officer, and you know, in Myanmar, possibly at the time there was no scope, so she ended up being Girl Guide member. So, you know, see how her mental makeup has been. That's one. The other thing is, you know, she, I think, at one stage realized that if she wants to make a comeback to Myanmar politics, it has to be a bomber politics. So if you combine the two, you will see that how tactfully she has maneuvered, and through this election, if anything has happened, in fact, the Army Chief Min Aung Hlaing has become weakened, not only in the ICJ and ICC process, or in the sanctions process by Canada and the Netherlands and the United States, but also in terms of internal, because his party has lost out, I think, not more than 5 or 10 seats that they're looking at. So how you see Aung San Suu Kyi eventually playing the democracy in Myanmar? Leave it with you for a while. At this stage, may I call upon Dr. Ali Ashraf? And Dr. Ali Ashraf is a professor at the Department of International Relations in Dhaka University. He has done his PhD from Pittsburgh University, USA, and taught IR in Dhaka University. Edited books called Intelligence, National Security and Foreign Policy, a South Asian Narrative. Very good compilation. I've read that partly. So, sir, we would like to hear from you that how you see China is reading the election. Is it along with their expectation? Because it looks like in the society army, at least in the election process, it may be a facade. And I would like to believe that losing its ground from the 2015, at least in terms of people's general vote, or China is well equipped to face any eventualities in Myanmar. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, sir, for inviting me to such an interesting event. I am really enjoying the input from the other scholars. Before I focus on Chinese views on the Myanmar elections, let me touch on some of the basics. The first thing is that the Rohingya crisis is one of the largest humanitarian disasters in the neighborhood of Bangladesh. And it is a protracted conflict that has been going on for the last 40 plus years. But we are more worried that the latest influx of the largest influx of nearly more than 750,000 Rohingyas in August 2017 onwards was the context for this discussion. Before understanding Chinese perspective, I think we need to put this into context that Bangladesh has been searching for solutions at 3 levels at least. The first would be bilateral, and we know that China has put enormous pressures and behind the scene diplomatic maneuvering to bring Bangladesh and Myanmar on board in at the end of 2017 that led to the conclusion of a bilateral repatriation deal between Bangladesh and Myanmar, which absolutely failed twice to take off. Secondly, in the multilateral track, we have seen 2 different trends. At the UN, ICC and ICJ, we have seen Bangladesh has been putting enormous pressures for playing the accountability card. On the other hand, another multilateral process is the UN-centric joint response plan, or the humanitarian response plan that is being mobilized in Bangladesh, in Cox's Bazar, Thirdly, the trilateral process, which is suggested by China, is the Bangladesh, China, Myanmar dialogues. Also, we call it tripartite dialogue. And I think the context for this discussion is that the Chinese envoy in Dhaka has communicated to Bangladesh Foreign Ministry that Myanmar is willing to sit down with Bangladesh after the election results. So before we touch on these things, let me rephrase some of the things. That the election is a farce. We all agree on that. Why it's a farce? Because Myanmar remains a garrison state. And the democracy we see there is not even close to the pseudo-democracy that we see in the ASEAN countries. It is a democracy without human rights. It's democracy without even, any inclusive criteria, as we have, mentioned. And actually, this democracy is becoming a legitimizing process for the military to have an institutional role in Myanmar for today and in the foreseeable future. So what we see is that the NLD and Suu Kyi do not have any real locus of power. Instead, it is the National Defense and Security Council. It is a key ministerial portfolios like Home, Foreign, and Border, and 25% reserve seat in the parliament by the military. So all these things are very complicating the factors, leaving any option for Suu Kyi to play as a vibrant or a key player in the Rohingya issue. Now the big question is, why does China matter, and why should we investigate the role of China? There are a number of reasons, at least 4 counts. Number one is it is a UN Security Council member from Asia, and it has the second largest border with Myanmar. Third thing is that it is the largest defense supplier for Myanmar, and fourthly, it is also one of the largest trading partners. More than 1/3 of Myanmar's import and export are done with China. Now, there are 3 things when it comes to Chinese role in Myanmar, or Chinese role in resolving the Rohingya crisis. I will use 3 words: diplomacy, drama, dilemma. By diplomacy, I mean is that since 2017, let's say in 2017, China floated the idea of 3-phase solution: ceasefire, deal, development, to as a recipe for dealing with the Rohingya crisis. Secondly, in 2018 December, China even worked with Russia to thwart the diplomatic process at the United Nations to investigate the Myanmar issue, the Rohingya issue. Thirdly, China even offered to support cash incentive to facilitate and to actualize the Rohingya repatriation process. Later, they denied it publicly. And fourthly, in October 20, this is the latest, that China is floating the idea of a tripartite talk. Now, these are diplomatic initiatives, and we're respectful for that. But behind the scene, I mean, it is also called drama because we are not sure to what extent it is going to make an effect on the ground, because repatriation hasn't begun. Myanmar has not created any preconditions or safe conditions for the return of the Rohingyas. Now, why is this drama coming up? And this is also creating a dilemma for China, because China is also having a reputational damage effect, because if China cannot deliver, on the diplomatic process, then it is risking its own reputation. Why isn't it putting that much pressure on Myanmar? We know the answer is the geopolitical interest, as Dr. Kausar has rightly talked about. And also there are a few things that I would like to add. The Chinese deep sea port and its special economic zone in Rakhine is on the big calculation in Chinese mind. So after election, what China would like to ensure is that these Belt and Road Initiative packages are well on track. It is more on Chinese agenda rather than the Rohingya agenda, right? Then the question is, what is the Chinese option as a mediator? There are 2 options, I would say. Do nothing.
If you could quickly,
30 seconds.
If you could quickly conclude, then we'll come back to you again on this.
China has 2 options: do nothing, which is costly for Myanmar because doing nothing would mobilize more international pressure, or do something, which means keeping shuttle diplomacy between Dhaka and Naypyidaw, which is actually bailing out Myanmar. Now, I'm very skeptic. Why I'm skeptic? Because the possible scenarios, there are 2 scenarios. One, Myanmar will buy more time through this trilateral or Tripokyo Sammelan or tripartite talks. Secondly, which is more likely, is that Myanmar might agree on starting the repatriation, but that is more unsustainable return for the Rohingyas, which is like creating no safe conditions for them. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Ali Ashraf. We'll come back to you in the diplomatic panel, the dream is known as high politics. So you have brought the high politics, which is a high voltage politics, often we call, into the game. But some people are optimistic. They feel if China-US relationship in the wake of the new administration in the United States um, is more successful in putting more pressure on the Chinese, not only in terms of trade and business, but also in terms of geopolitics, like a closing in, the way it has closed in Russia or Soviet Union in those days, containment theory. Then China might sort of shift its gear in terms of resolving Rohingya crisis, because that will be used against China quite strongly. So we would like to hear from you as to how you see evolving Chinese and U.S. relationship in the vicinity of Bay of Bengal will feature out in this. So at this stage, may I ask Professor Negin Pao Kepgan from the Jindal Global University of India. He is a professor and teaches, and also the assistant dean and executive director of the Center for South Asian Studies, and he teaches at that university. He also specializes in Myanmar. Sir, I have a very specific question to you, and we are glad that you have joined this platform. There has always been a kind of a big question in Bangladesh, at least, and that why India failed to play an expected role, expected from Bangladeshis in this crisis. And often some of us sort of wander around finding a question, given India's refugee policy or hosting people who are in distress in the past. Why this difference? Number one. Number two, do you think India joining the Security Council and changing circumstances would help them to retune its policy towards the Rohingya crisis? Over to you, sir.
All right, thank you, Chair. Good morning, and maybe I think good morning for everyone. I guess.
Yes.
Our speaker from
except Canadian.
Also morning, right? Good to see you, Chair, again. I met you in University of Dhaka when you were Foreign Secretary, and also in North South University last year. And it's a pleasure to meet you virtually this time. Before I answer your question, I just would like to go some general overview of India's foreign policy on Myanmar, or India's relationship with Myanmar. So, coming first to the election per se, so far as my understanding or knowledge is concerned, I have not heard from any Indian leaders commenting on the outcome of, or let's say the likely outcome of Myanmar's election. What I see is that it is a matter of time which and what New Delhi would say with regard to the election. My main argument or my main thesis in this event is that regardless of which party comes to power, of course we know that by now NLD is going to win largely. So India will reach out to the government in Naypyidaw. This is something that I would like to put forward up front. Myanmar is one reason is that Myanmar is essential for the success of India's neighborhood policy and its Act-East policies in terms of economic growth and also security matters. More investments in Myanmar will give New Delhi greater access to Myanmar and its people. Among others, Myanmar is India's gateway to Southeast Asia for trade and connectivity through which it can penetrate into the greater Asia-Pacific region. Moreover, India needs Myanmar's support and cooperation to keep its borders safe from cross-border insurgent activities, especially in its Northeast India region. So one thing I just like to highlight before coming to your point is that we can see India's deep engagement with Myanmar, especially from last month. Last month in October, the Foreign Secretary and the Chief of Army Staff visited Myanmar and had interaction with the leaders of the country. What is important? What is the important takeaway from that meeting was that India is always prepared to, let's say, deal with any leadership or any party that may comes to power. For example, during their visit, they met with the state councillor, Aung San Suu Kyi, who is leading the NLD party, and also they met with the military chief, Senior General Min Aung Hlaing. So this shows that India is very, let's say, very careful or very diplomatic in the sense that it would not upset one party over the other when it comes to engaging with Myanmar. Then in terms of Rohingya issue, before I come to your point, in both Myanmar, Bangladesh, India, the border nations of India, Bangladesh, and Myanmar are interconnected in many ways. India's ties with Dhaka depend much on how the Rohingya issues deal with by Myanmar and what role does India play in ensuring timely repatriation of Rohingya refugees. To that end, India has made several efforts. India is, as a close friend, partner, and neighbor of both Bangladesh and Myanmar, has a deep and abiding interest to see an early stabilization of the situation of the Rakhine state. India's policy, or India's what is largely believed to be India's policy on the Rohingya crisis, is that India supports a safe, sustainable, and speedy repatriation of the Rohingya refugees from Bangladesh to Rakhine state, based on the understanding between Bangladesh and Myanmar. India fully understands the urgency of this situation and has committed humanitarian efforts both in Myanmar and Bangladesh to facilitate an early return of the refugees. India has provided, several assistances to both Myanmar and Bangladesh in this regard. I just want to make one final statement, is that regardless of which party, political party or coalition government comes to power in India, it is likely that the Act East policy will remain an important front in India's foreign policy. Similarly, Myanmar government, democratic or hybrid regime, or military or any authoritarian regime will continue to maintain bilateral ties with India, largely because of economic and political reasons. A country's national and security interests primarily save its foreign policy. The Look East policy was basically a gold change of the Indian government in the aftermath of the Cold War era. India shifted its policy from pro-democracy to pro-military junta as it best served the country's national and security interests. Myanmar diligently maneuvered India's political gesture by playing a balancing game between India and China. The Look East policy, now called Act East policy, has been a mutually beneficial transaction for economic and political regions between New Delhi and Naypyidaw. One thing that I will just, to respond to your question, India also has its own problems with the Rohingya the Rohingya refugees. I think, there are about 40,000 or so the Rohingya refugees are here in India in different parts of the country. And Indian government, one way or the other, wants to repatriate these to Myanmar, but so far it has not been successful largely yet. But again, the point is that despite the political intention, or despite the efforts or the policy it has had by the present government, at the same time, what it New does is that it doesn't want to jeopardize its bilateral relations with Myanmar. So this was quite evident from the visit of the Foreign Secretary and the Chief of Army Staff just before election. So
thank you.
Okay, my time is over.
Yes, we will come back to you, Professor Kipgen.
Sure,
very interesting. Very interesting to listen to you as to how India tries to smoothen his bilateral relationship with Myanmar. And when I was listening to you, I was sort of wondering where Bangladesh in that case stands in the whole equation, and we'd like to hear from you. There's also an interesting figure that you gave, 40,000. I remember 2014-15, it was 8,000, then it became 14,000, now it has become 40,000. That means there's a continuous flow that is happening in terms of Rohingyas going to India. Is that correct? We'd like you to hear from you, from 8,000 to 14,000 over the last 3 years, is the figure that you quoted. And also, I understand the way you sort of try to rationalize the Indian policies towards Rohingya. Only one thing I'll set flag, that you know, the government that you're talking about is already on the dock in ICJ in terms of its genocidal intent. So we would be very interested to hear when a country becomes, or a government becomes, more correctly, a sort of involved in a genocide, how the other countries looks at the relation with that with this government. This is something also need to be revisited at this stage. So I'll leave the question with you. In terms of our speaker, we have now Dr. Jashimuddin, who is an associate professor at the North-South University. He has done his PhD in 2005 from Osaka University on international public policy. He has also been founding coordinator of the Center for Peace Study, and he has been my colleague in the BISS when I was foreign secretary. We have traveled many areas and exchanged notes. Dr. Jashim, we would like to hear from you as to how Bangladesh, now in view of, we have heard China, we have heard India, should evaluate its bilateral relation. You have written a very good piece on that in the past. So we would like to focus sort of by Bangladesh, not traditional relationship, but in the post-Myanmar election relationship. Over to you, Dr. Jashim.
Thank you very much, sir, for giving me the floor. Assalamu alaikum and good morning to everyone. First of all, I would like to say that there will be no impact of this Myanmar election on the Rohingya crisis. And as you see that the same military-backed government will actually come to the power, and they will not change the status quo. Aung San Suu Kyi is expected to come to the power, and it means that a government which is accused of genocide, war crimes, and ethnic cleansing by the International Court of Justice, the highest court of the United Nations, and of course, with the verdict of the Myanmar people. It gives a message that the verdict of the ICJ, International Court of Justice, has no impact actually on the people, human rights activists, or civil society in that country. I don't know whether if they have human rights activists or civil societies, because after the genocide and ethnic cleansing, we didn't hear any voice or protest from human rights activists and civil society there. So the new government so far will continue to play its diplomatic tactics and maneuver to make the international community fool that they are ready to accept Rohingya from Bangladesh. But in reality, the fact is they will not change the environment, in Rakhine for any successful repatriation process. And ultimately, the Rohingya people who face horror in 2017, they will be scared. They will not go back, unless and until their security and safety is ensured there. So, however, we see one thing from Bangladesh point of view, that Myanmar, always prefer bilateralism. They, to avoid any further negotiation in the multilateral level, and to avoid international pressure, they always refer to the bilateral agreement signed in November 2017. So, in my understanding, this agreement is not effective to implement the repatriation. Here we need to understand the term repatriation. This is not something that will send the people over there and then again they will face the same problem and then will come back to Bangladesh. So this repatriation means that the Myanmar government, who is responsible, this ethnic cleansing, genocide, war crimes, they have to ensure, they have to respect the international law, regulations. They have to ensure the security and safety of these people so that these people can live there with the dignity. But so far, it seems that the normal bilateral diplomacy will utterly fail, and Bangladesh needs to focus much more on, the multilateral diplomacies and alternative paths. Here, I would like to say one thing, that before the election, the general election in Myanmar in 2015, the Rohingya people had a great expectation from Aung San Suu Kyi, a leader who fought, so many years for human rights and democracy. But in this election, Rohingya people actually, they do not have any expectation, because they saw that how these so-called democratic government support Myanmar military, which actually accused of genocide and cleansing. One thing, sir, that since Myanmar shifted from a military regime to a democratic regime, the big economies, the international communities, they started business, trade, and heavily invested in Myanmar because of the changing nature of the regime. But the question is it a democracy? The question is, was it a democratic election? You already, Brigadier Shakwat and other panelists mentioned that 25% of the seats in the parliament are reserved for the military people. Democracy requires representations of the people. Then the question of democracy is under question. And again, we see the, ethnic minority. If minority rights are violated, if minorities' voices is silenced by the majority, then it's not a democracy. The international community, they needs to understand this, that according to all the CNN, Al Jazeera, New York Times, and Guardian, reputed international news agencies I followed, that about 1.6 million ethnic minorities, including Rohingyas, they're deprived from their voting rights. So what happened in Myanmar is actually a tyranny of the majority. It's not democracy. So therefore, the international community needs to reconsider whether they should actually have trade, business, investment in Myanmar. A big economic sanction is actually, in my understanding, is required, and it can actually break the status quo. And Bangladesh actually must, appeal for this sanction, and of course take other measures if it doesn't, function. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shims, for bringing out it. Now, I leave a question with you. It looks like that the whole issue is sort of circling around a space, and we are not able to break out of the circle in terms of peacefully resolving it. In these circumstances, how about the idea of creating a safe zone now that Aung San Suu Kyi, the daughter of democracy, is in power, for the minorities? And as you know, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh has proposed it 2017, 18, and 19, the UNGA. So I would like to hear from you. Is that something we should be pursuing along with the whole issue of accountability? So with this, we come first round of questions. We have a couple of very interesting questions, and it looks like that the US election has overshadowed our mind and thought process almost of everybody, because some of the questions that we got all related to what will happen when Biden comes in terms of the Rohingya crisis. So we will come back to that. That's a question we will throw to everyone. But can I sort of go back to Dr. Shakwat and sort of flag the question that I raised? Is the democracy that is in practice in Myanmar, is it a liberal one or something else? over to you. You have 1 minute actually. We'll give 1 minute for each question, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll try to give you an answer as fast as possible. These days, we hear a different kind of democracy in different countries. A new kind of definition where democracy is deficient in those countries. Uh, I would rather say this is a militarized democracy. If you look at it, the military itself does not come under the civilian government. They have an autonomy to act within themselves. And the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Home Affairs, the Ministry of Borders are with them. These are the three key ministries for governance. And therefore, Aung San Suu Kyi could be anything but not a leader of the whole government system in Myanmar. So what do we expect? We expect a hybrid government, or you can call it hybrid government. You can call it a flawed government through a flawed election. But the point which I was trying to make is I want to throw a flag in that. In this kind of a government, you don't expect much. The crisis has been created by them. This is not a crisis has been created by somebody else. When this crisis took place, Aung San Suu Kyi was very much in if pseudo power. Therefore, I don't expect any change in the scenario. But I would like to just throw another sort of a question for everybody. And I'm very keen in this kind of a discussion because this has been very close to me. I've been writing and writing and writing mostly in Bangla. The question is why India is investing so much of money in a line of logistics of 1,200 kilometers traversing just to come to Aizel. What is the reason? So there is a crisis between India and China in Rakhine, in the North Rakhine and South Rakhine. Why I'm saying, being a keen student of conflict, the Arakan army is increasing in its strength and in its operation, and that is mostly restricted on the northern Rakhine. So far, Arakan army has never attacked south of Sitwe. So the geopolitics, which I could discuss for hours together, we have to look into this also. And lastly, I would say, to me, in my bottom line, in all my writing, we are not expecting anything from this government if we think so that it's a democratic government. The West has to be told that this is not a democratic government. This is a facade of democracy and military behind the military rule, totally. In which country 25% of the seats of all assemblies are reserved for military? Quickly, I would say there are 6 autonomous regions in Myanmar which has been created by those people who are fighting. I would suggest not a no-fly zone, an autonomous region within the North Rakhine for Rohingya. Should we work on that? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me just, I fully agree with you, sir, on this. Let me also add that in 2011, the then president, who was a general, asked as to what kind of a constitution and democracy that you think will eventually flourish in Myanmar. And he said, and I quoting him, it will be disciplined, flourishing democracy.
Right.
Disciplined, flourishing democracy has led to flourishment of illiberal democracy. So that's what I love to call it is illiberal democracy.
Let me interject a little. All big business, all investment coming from foreign countries, east or west, is controlled by the military generals.
Absolutely. Let me throw a question, because a number of our panelists have raised, and I'll come back to the Biden issue, including Dr. Kausar Ahmad and Mr. Ali Ashraf to some extent, that, it looks like a business as usual for most of the countries. So, and I tried to dig out what is the investment scenario, accumulated. And I have a graph in front of me I wish I could share with you. And it shows that over the years, it's a cumulative FDI in Myanmar. Singapore, is in the lead, followed by China, followed by Thailand, Hong Kong, and then UK, Republic of Korea, Vietnam, Maldives. No, sorry, not Maldives, Malaysia, Japan, Netherlands, India, and USA. So this is where we stand in terms of investment in Myanmar. Official, this is from the official site of Myanmar that I picked up. So it looks like a business as usual. So a government which is undergoing a international court process and initial evidences are there that it has committed a genocide. How do we then bring in the whole issue of human rights and ethics? And that's where I call selective application of human rights. So I leave it to you to feel free to take the floor and and comment. But every comment has to be less than 1 minute so that others can come in.
Just a 30-second comment. The increase in the popularity of Aung San Suu Kyi was due to her presence in ICJ.
Absolutely.
And that has given her more seats this time than the before. But it doesn't hardly matter because
exactly.
that military has its own stick around.
Yes. So thank you very much. Anybody, before I come back and sort of guide our question to a particular panelist, anybody wants to take the floor on the whole issue of business as usual model between Western world, Eastern world, and Myanmar?
Let me just, okay, let me just say one.
Please, Mr. Kepgen.
What happens is that in political science and international relations theory, we discuss what we call a transition to transaction, which means a transition whereby the authoritarian leaders are heavily involved in the transition process. And everyone, as someone who observes closely on Myanmar's political development, we have to understand the fact that Myanmar is a country in transition. It's not a fully democratized nation yet, as some of the panelists have rightly pointed out. So it is a gradual and incremental democratization, and this is going to take time. And we don't know for how long this is going to happen. If you look at the case of Indonesia, Indonesia went through a similar pattern whereby the role of military was gradually reduced and eventually became to zero.
May I humbly remind you that Indonesia lost its territory because of that? You remember? No, there's a country created out of that.
Yeah, I understand, but my point is, I'm trying to put a contrast between Myanmar and Indonesia. In Myanmar, military is not yet willing to do that. It's not yet willing to hand over power to the civilian administration. Therefore, we don't know exactly how long, but they say that when the time comes, what they mean by when the time comes is that when there is no threat to national and territorial integrity of the country, but we don't know exactly what's that definition and how long they will hold on to. I just wanted to interject the point that Myanmar is still a country in transition. It's a transition through transaction whereby authoritarian leaders and democratic forces are in agreement for a hybrid regime. So we should not be mistaken for calling Myanmar as a democracy.
Can I suggest that during this transition, one can get away killing people? Is that what you're saying?
Not necessarily. What I'm saying is, it is not a perfect democracy yet. It is a country in transition whereby mistakes are coming from both ends. So that's the point I'm trying to make.
Professor, since you raised it, let me also then say that it is committing a genocide is not a mistake. Let's not downgrade the concept of genocide, for heaven's sake. It might happen to anyone. It has happened to us in 71. So we exactly know. And I was a kid, I have seen it myself. So we get extremely unnerved when a normal, sir, I will give you a floor. When someone wants to equate genocide with a normal human rights violations or in fragmented ad hoc human rights violations. Thank you. Over to you, sir.
Let me jump in. We are talking about Rohingya genocide. But Myanmar has been I would say that Myanmar is a genocidal country. It has been in the practice of genocide for a long, long time. It has massacred Kokang, it has massacred Karen's, it has massacred Shans, and that's how this autonomous region has come up. So therefore, how much time Myanmar would take? 70 years now. How much time Myanmar would take come out of this? And I see no future because the strategic importance of Myanmar vis-a-vis Chinese overture here in the world over, it's very difficult to settle this issue. And last point that I would like to say, we somehow it has to be forced on Myanmar to take back their citizen and give them the space.
Thank
Can
you.
I jump in, sir, a little bit?
Yeah, please come in.
Thank you, sir. No, I'll just quickly respond to the ongoing. I'll add rather to the discussion. To respond to Mr. Shahid's question that whether there is a general amnesia in the West with regards to Rohingya genocide and its intervention, and I would say yes, actually. Especially, I can speak quite confidently from Canada that. We are trying since last two years, we are working on Rohingya crisis, and we see a very declining trend of interest from Canadian, all sides, civil society and government as well. I mean, initially there was a lot of fanfare and interest. Mr. Bob Ray was appointed and we were all happy and, so on and so forth, but it died down very quickly. Even for your information, dear audience, Canadian commitment of $300 million is done in coming March, and we are yet to see any announcement from the government of Canada to further, put humanitarian funds on that. Secondly, from the US side, I see zero interest actually. And the Rohingya diaspora are aware of the works of Dr. Wakaruzaman, with who I interacted a little bit on previous occasions. I don't see any interest. And I just would like to add the final point here that I am the program co-chair of Canadian International Councils, the largest think tank in Canada. And I couldn't motivate CIC Canada to hold a seminar or webinar in today's context to discuss Chinese BRI and Canadian involvement there. Whereas, as you all know, Canada is deeply involved in, catching up with Huawei case, and especially, as you know, the CFO of Huawei, Meng Wanzhou, is interned in Canada.
Thank you. We will create, NSU will create a platform for BRI discussion. And our distinguished honorable chair is listening. So we'll create a platform for a discussion on BRI where you can join in and
thank you, sir.
show us how Canada is playing in this country. When the floor is with you, can we sort of go back to you that you have mentioned no geopolitical change, status quo. So what the world needs to do, or Rohingyas need to do, or Bangladesh need to do, who is the worst sufferer of the whole thing, to change the status quo in terms of geopolitics?
Sir, thank you very much. I'll quickly come to the point, and I'll go back to our earlier research, which was published in January 2020. And in the last chapter, Peace Building Avenues, we have absolutely clearly said that we have to force Myanmar. I sincerely echo with Brigadier Shakawa's comment that there has to be an enforcement and accountability for a state which commits genocide in a very deliberate way. And in our chapter, we have analyzed the possibility and modalities of the responsibility to protect, convention that, again, Canada is the, main architect of the convention, and it has successfully been adopted in the US, and we have at least seen 2 cases of intervention by the coalition of willings, totally bypassing the United Nations in Libya and Sudan. So we have a tool to actually intervene to stop genocide. And if you see the conventions of R2P, it is deliberately planned to intervene crimes against humanity and genocide. And if we have the ICJ's clear verdict, I think that is the only way to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will certainly keep note of that. At this stage, could we come back to our Myanmar colleague who has been very interestingly listening to us, Mr. Javed? what you feel listening to the discussions? 1 minute.
Listening to the discussions in terms of that going from the international community and international companies, I would say, I think there is definitely something that the international communities could do in terms of funding, in terms of lending credit. For example, Myanmar is supposed to go completely digitalization of their identity in 2030, and which is impact being funded by the World Bank and being given out money from Austria Bank of UniCredit and being carried out by a French company called Thales that will carry on the digitalizations. And what these digitalizations would do is the Rohingya identity lock in. Right now, the way that the facade of the whole ID thing from white card to new village in white card to NVC, the NVC that doesn't mention the race, that mentioned race, or an NVC application which the latest scheme, which was that doesn't say the race, but the applicant were asked, the Rohingya were asked, like, when did you arrive to Myanmar, which essentially enforcing them a foreign identity as if they count. But once all things became digitalized, it will be really hard to tackle. And I think in terms of giving out these loans funds to digitalize the identity, I think it is very important that we tackle the rule and the law of 1982, which was arbitrarily racist and being built by the military and is still being enforced by the ministry that is under the military control, not the government's, the Aung San Suu Kyi control. So there's like a very systematic, a very basic barrier that to tackle with this law first,
Good.
then everything will come into place second.
Mr. Javed, what the Myanmar diaspora, those who are not comfortable with the government, wants to do, what that you're talking about, living abroad?
We are mainly talking about on the Rohingya that are outside of Burma, especially in Bangladesh. These Rohingyans gotta go sometimes back, but those going back should be going back with dignity and should be going back.
No, fine. That we will ask one of the camp people. But as a diaspora, is there something that you are doing over the cup of tea, at least, in terms of getting your voice heard wherever you are?
What my point was not that we are trying to repatriate or we are trying to go back. What my point was to be able to go back to, we are encouraging to sort of preconditions that not only on the Myanmar side, but also on the Rohingya diaspora who are living, especially in Bangladesh, to be able to have access to some sort of educations, because as this is not the first wave, this is not the second wave. In fact, this is the third wave. If all of the refugees who will go back uneducated, uninformed, not knowing the real situations, and for sure there will be another fourth wave. So we're trying as much as with failed attempt, with some success, to be able to accept some sort of educations and being able to aware of the situation.
Thank you, Mr. Javed. You will get an opportunity to speak again. Dr. Ali Ashraf, sir, you brought 3 concepts, including the high voltage drama. Could you sort of share with us on that a little more?
Yes, sir. Thank you. What I said is that China has tried to project itself to be a diplomatic broker, and the big question is, there are doubts to what extent that is more of a drama or diplomacy, because there has not been any significant effect of the diplomatic initiatives. So that's what I say, that it's a dilemma as well for China to not to be seen as dramatizing this diplomacy or rather creating some more impact. And I think that there are two in the study of diplomacy, we talk about carrots and sticks. The carrot would be that China has a huge investment offer for Myanmar, and people say that the stick is that China has some control over some of the armed groups in Myanmar, and it is quite obvious that, as Dr. Kausar said, in the last in the latest peace process, some of the groups did not participate, and Myanmar blames China for backing those armed groups. But interestingly, it is interesting that there's a big question like whether China is voluntarily coming as a mediator, or Myanmar is using China to play a diffusing role. Myanmar, it seems that whenever there is huge international pressures, whether it comes from the ICJ's initial observations, or whether there is a UNSC debate, it seems that China emerges as a rescuer of Myanmar. So I think that China has not been fully utilizing its leverage in Myanmar, and so Bangladesh. I mean, the lesson for Bangladesh is that we have to explore all other options. Definitely, as I see that in the past, United States was playing a very effective role, partnering with United Kingdom and a few other countries to make sure that the debates on the Rohingya issue gets on the agenda in the UN different platforms, despite the fact that China tried to oppose it, Russia tried to oppose it, and a few other countries did it. So I think that we need to explore to what extent we can have United States re-engaged on this discourse. And also, it is also a fact that it is United States and Canada, which were the first two countries to put some of the top generals on the sanctions regime. So those targeted sanctions can also play a role in naming and shaming Myanmar.
So we'll come back to that. We'll keep the Biden post-Biden era on the dashboard for a while. And then you can bring in the whole use of sanctions. Could I ask Professor Jashim? I left a question with you that what are the alternatives to break the status quo in the whole conflict that you see from the Bangladesh side? What that Bangladesh civil society government should be doing to resolve this issue, because it has the potential to destabilize the region. Over to you, Dr. Joshim. Unmute yourself.
Sorry, sir. Yeah, as actually we have observed that the bilateral agreement signed between these two countries is not effective to implement the repatriation process. So ultimately, as I already mentioned, that we need to focus on the alternative paths, alternative ways, and that includes the multilateral approach. And also Bangladesh can go to the accountability front, and all we know that the verdict that clearly indicated that Myanmar is a genocidal country, genocidal state, and but of course it is also a reality that to get the final verdict, it's a long process. So therefore, I think the international sanction regime, that could be an alternative. And I have mentioned that Bangladesh needs to promote its diplomatic efforts at various international level or multilateral level, like United Nations General Assembly, OIC, ASEAN, SAARC, and bilaterally with the major economies like you see Canada, America, and other European countries, Asian countries like Japan, to put their sanction. Bangladesh now has a position to, better than before, that this country is a genocidal state. I mean, Myanmar is a genocidal state, and still it ignores international norms, regulations, and reluctant to give the rights of the minority people. So Bangladesh can create a global consensus to create pressure. So that is one. And if the question comes, like, if all these, international communities, pressure or the sanction doesn't function, or if the international community, the countries I mentioned, if they're reluctant to put such pressure or put sanction, then what to do? So ultimately, of course, Rohingya people, they can, they have all the rights to gain their, fundamental rights in an organized way. So that could be, in my understanding, another alternative.
Good. Thank you, Jashim. and we'll have some more time. Now, at this stage, there has been overwhelming questions from the participants as to what impact the new administration in the United States in terms of Biden will bring, if any, changes in the Rohingya crisis. Before I give the floor, whoever wants it, just let me share with you uh, the Biden administration, because of President-elect Biden's own background in foreign policy, 30 years, including chairing the Foreign Relations Committee. He has put together one of the first committee or advisors committee of about 2,000 former diplomats, academicians, and strategists in terms of putting together a foreign policy for the Biden administration. And in that administration, there are people who are who have all along in their life been dealing with the forced displacement. So that's one, and I know a couple of them who are playing an active role in this. Number two, Biden wrote an article in the Foreign Affairs in March, April, and he said, in very categorical term, that the Trump's refugee policy and the immigration policy is basically manifestation his racist attitude. So he was very clear when he said this. So we expect a major change. As you know, the whole refugee programs and the immigration program has almost come to a standstill globally. So there will be a major change, and we will see how that features out. But we have to keep in mind, it was President Obama who lifted all the sanctions and embargoes at the same time from the Myanmar. And at the time, we remember we were kind of advocating, some of us, including from Bangladesh and some of the neighboring countries, saying that let's do it gradually, so that we know how this new government will behave. And based on this, gradually left. But he decided after his second visit that he will, although he's uttered the word Rohingya, for which there was an exchange of letters between the two governments, but at the end he lifted all the sanctions, and which gave the Myanmar government almost a free hand to did what it did in 2017. So that's something we have to keep in mind and see whether they are going to make a course correction or not this time. And for that, I have already put it in writing. The government of Bangladesh has proactively need to get engaged with the team, Biden team, to make sure that they don't keep this in margin. We have an added advantage because this is another interface between China and the United States in the Bay of Bengal. Very unfortunate, but this is one of the kind of a hot potato, smaller hot potato in the politics that we keep in mind. At this stage, let me open the floor and see whether the status quo could be broken with the change in the administration in the United States.
May I quickly?
Please, sir. Please.
First of all, thank you very much for giving a sort of a background of the Biden's foreign policy. But you, being a foreign policy master, you know that American foreign policy shifts very gradually. It just not all of a sudden it changes. Now, first, my observation is when Obama did that, that was the time when Suki was seen as a dream girl of democracy by the West, and that was one time at that time. But at this time, I would like to just point out, and you all of us know that this is now the game of what is happening in Indo-Pacific and the Bay of Bengal, and China and the USA. Now, the policy which the outgoing administration had made, though it's not there, so for long time planning, the IPS, and in IPS we find that the regional countries, particularly in the South Asian countries, these are being drawn in, and there Myanmar plays a very important strategic role. And what we are seeing the Indians not only in development projects, but they are also strengthening the Myanmar military by giving a submarine, and in the pipeline is the T-72 tanks and so on and so forth. Therefore, my point is, our question to everybody is that how much the IPS, if it remains as it is, would play in US foreign policy as regards to Myanmar and as regards to Rohingya issue. As I said, unless Myanmar is forced by either United Nations or by international community or by fifth dimension, it's very difficult to settle this issue.
Thank you, sir.
All right, Chair,
Uh, please take the floor, whoever is it.
Sure. It's
Kim,
me.
okay, sir, you have the floor.
All right, a few things. I would like to repeat what I said when we met at North-South University, when the Foreign Minister of Bangladesh was there. You were there as Foreign Secretary. I know my suggestion was not very popular with a lot of people in the whole and also in Bangladesh, but I would like to repeat what I said. There are three possible solutions under the UNHCR in terms of settling or finding a solution for refugees. And one is, of course, voluntary repatriation. This is something that we would love to see happening, and the international community wants to see that happen. But I said then, and what I would like to repeat today is that I do not see this as being realistic. In the sense that there are three possible ways whereby we can address the international community, especially UNHCR can address problems, is that voluntary repatriation, and which we would like to see, which I have just described. The second thing is what we call resettlement in a third country. And you know, Donald Trump reduced substantially the number of refugees that can be brought into America during his administration. And I don't have exactly the number in front of me, but I heard and I saw from Trump's campaign the cap or the number of refugees that being granted in under his administration. So having said that, the second possibility is that third country resettlement. So I think we should be looking as advocates and as people who are, let's say, following closely on the developments of Rohingya crisis. We should also be exploring, working with UNHCR and UNDP and others, trying to somehow maybe a possibility of resettling some of this refugee population. And the third one, which is the most unpopular during my talk, was local integration. And I believe this, even though we do not like very much in Bangladesh, I think this is something that we should also explore as a comprehensive package. And I believe that not 100% of these refugees would go back to Myanmar, even if that opportunity comes. So some of them would be resettled, and some of them might be wanting to do local integration. So I think these are the three areas we should reiterate, and we should always keep in mind when it comes to looking at a possible and long-term solution for the Rohingya crisis.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I hope India also looks at the second possibilities little more intensely. We were in the Biden foreign policy,
right?
And any status quo breaking. So, who wants to take the floor?
Sir, let me quickly jump in.
Okay, just 1 minute. If anyone from the participants wants to speak on the Biden and the post-Biden era and Rohingya crisis, please feel free to raise your hand, and we will give you the floor. Yes, Dr. Kausar.
So I'll just go back to 2015, an article very eloquently written by Mr. Ben Rhodes, a former Deputy National Security Advisor to Barack Obama. And if you have any patience reading it, you will find he mapped the ideas of Aung San Suu Kyi being portrayed as Brigadier Shakaut rightly said, poster child of Western democracy, and she's going to change the whole Myanmar system. And going back to the question whether American administration would review their stance in terms of their geostrategic interest in South and Southeast Asia, I was trying to understand if the Biden administration has already formed its team. So here is a quick recap from Politico, as you know, a very well-known online publisher. They are saying that Ambassador Susan Rice is the lead contender in the Department of State. Followed by Mr. William Burns, former, is a long-term Foreign Service officer in this Qadar. So I do see that America will rethink their engagement and isolation, which happened in the last 4 years. But the center of gravity to bring US attention here is actually China. And I'd like to share with all of you that America is lagging behind possibly a decade or so. And within the past decade, China has reached to so many places in the Indian Ocean periphery. And as Brigadier Shagawat also mentioned, that it is really a difficult time for America even to catch up with them. And just think about the string and pearl strategy and number of pearls they have established in Sri Lanka, Gwadar, and Kwakpu, and so on and so forth. So it is actually quite late for America. But I think so if Americans are given the reality of Chinese penetration in the Indian Ocean region and all, USA might be interested to get in again.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We
Hey,
will
Joan,
ponder.
thank you. Thank you.
Just give me 1 minute, sir. Is it Professor Ashraf?
Yes, sir.
So, just give me a minute, sir.
Sure.
Very interesting. In fact, Ben wrote an article in Foreign Policy, not the Foreign Affairs, on the whole Biden's foreign policy after the July New York speech of last year of Biden on the foreign policy. And I was actually thinking that he will bring back the whole issue of refugees into that, which didn't feature out prominently. And I understand, because they're so much into their own problem that they're possibly leaving out some of the others for more detailed exercise. But one thing also clearer, that for the first time, we always know that foreign policy is at the end is your domestic extension of your domestic policy, but it has never been in the past exercised by the big powers. They had a policy for the rest of the world, they have a policy for themselves, depending on their national. The first time they are saying the time has come when Americans' domestic policy should link up with the foreign policy, starting with health, starting with economy, starting with leadership, starting with multilateralism. So if that continues to remain a rallying point, that when we are doing something for America, we are also doing the same with the rest of the country. That will also a new model of linking domestic policy with the foreign policy, but we'll see how it evolves. But my guess is the whole displacement, refugee, and migration issue is feature out in the Biden policy very prominently, because I would not name, I know a couple of people who sort of are so passionate on this, who were thrown out of the State Department and went to the universities to teach. They are looking at coming back. So if that happens, then if the Bangladesh engages with them at an appropriate moment, it's also, there's so many things on the plate. So you have to really go and stand with your own plate and say that, look, please look at our plate also, and that will have a Chinese angle. So that will immediately ring a bell. But we'll see how it goes. We are trying to also give some policy things to the government. Over to Professor Ashraf.
Thank you, sir. I'm glad that you talked a little bit about Biden's background. I think that someone who served in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee as a chair for many years, Biden is going to be one of the most well-informed foreign policy expert, president in the United States. So
they sort of sarcastically the Republican used to say that he's a moving foreign policy of United States.
Right, and so he's very well informed, and he's very sharp in terms of having a key eye on foreign policy. So I do agree with you that immigration and refugee policy will come to more prominence under the Biden administration. But keep in mind that when we talk about the prospect of Biden team thinking about re-engaging China. And this concept comes because we have seen that in the American foreign policy, there are two different discourses. One is either you contain China or you engage China. And the Democrats under Clinton and Obama
or you contain by engaging.
Right. So my reading of the Democrat foreign policy is that they are more in favor of engage with China so that China, transitions, well, smoothly from an authoritarian system to a responsible actor in the global multilateral institutional system. And this is possibly one reason why the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement was signed and China was expected to play a big role. This is what my understanding is, that United States under Biden would like to more engage China through in the international trading system, but the larger American foreign policy of either balancing China or containing China will remain there for in the foreseeable future. As a result, I mean, I don't see any possibility of USA putting pressures on China on the Rohingya issue. I mean, it's not there. And also, we need to keep in mind that China, Myanmar is a country with huge natural resources. So everyone is flocking to Myanmar, trying to get a piece of the pie. And even Canada has one of the fantastic Rohingya refugee policy under Bob Rae's team. But we do also know that a Canadian team was hired by Myanmar as a consulting firm for doing a feasibility study of the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. So I think Bangladesh as a country that has been suffering the most from this Rohingya refugee crisis has to be keeping the eyes and ears very open and closely watching. I mean, the tacit and the implicit behavior, foreign policy behavior of the friends and the allies in the international forum. That's it, sir.
No, thank you.
Ambassador Shoaib, can I, as a participant, can I raise a question?
Sir, I will give you a floor. I'll give you a floor. Just since Dr. Ashraf reminded us of the Canadian company doing the Belt and Road Initiative assessment in Myanmar. Late last year, in fact, the Japanese JICA and JETRO put out a very interesting report called Rakhine State Investment Opportunity Survey. And very interestingly, I was going through, it's quite a 125-page report. But in terms of what is the advantage of Rakhine, it says it's located at the Bay of Bengal. That's the first one. The second, it has huge natural resources. Second, this will also give you the geopolitics or geoeconomics. And then it says that it is continuity with world's most populous markets, Bangladesh and India. See how they're looking at things in terms of it. And then the whole issue of resources. So, different countries looks at this from a different angle. When we were looking at genocide, they are looking at possible investment and looking at our market from Northern Rakhine. See, that you keep in mind, we should not be suffering from illusion as well. Tawfiq sir, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador Shoaib. I just, as a participant, I just have a question to raise to the panelists that, and maybe a little comment that, yeah, the whole Biden foreign policy, yeah, definitely it has some shifting tone. But in my view, it will be depending what Bangladesh wants and how Bangladesh play with the new administration. Otherwise, we know that there's this whole embargo regime that the previous administration before Trump has applied on Myanmar. It did not work. And it did not work because they have developed a mechanism of how to live with embargo. So Myanmar is a country which is living with embargo for 40 years. And they were much difficult time just 40 years ago or 30 years ago. Now they are having a more kind of in a convenient atmosphere where everyone wants to invest on them. No one wants to make a bad relation with them. And now what we see that after ICJ was very important to make this whole issue alive in terms of in the international media and other areas. But ICJ itself will not play a role because after ICJ, American government, they gave embargo to Myanmar generals not to travel to USA. They don't care about those embargoes. They travel to UK, their children are being established in Australian universities. They bought their homes in Canada or in UK. So they don't care whether the Myanmar generals are allowed to travel to USA or not. So those kind of the things we have to come out, that we have to think about Bangladesh, what Bangladesh really wants and how Bangladesh wants to play this whole game, and especially this BRI versus Indo-Pacific strategy. And if Bangladesh decide that Bangladesh wants to play, then probably there are a space. So maybe we cannot have time to discuss all these opportunities, but this traditional way of putting pressure on Myanmar did not work. And probably it will not work even in the Biden administration. We'll have to think out of the box. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tawfiq. In fact, this leads us to a question which coming from the participants saying that, in these circumstances, then what Bangladesh should do? And one of the participants or a number of them, as Professor Issa Zakaria sort of skimmed it and put forward to us, what is the Bashanchor? Is that something viable? So the last stretch, we focus on what Bangladesh need to do in terms of the discussions, and including the Bashanchor safe zone and the rest of it. So floor is open. Can I then?
Sir, I'm surprised that you are asking. I'm surprised that you're opening the floor to address the Bashanchor question. I would be more willing to hear your own story, because my understanding as a student of...
I will. Just
yes,
give
okay,
give me a minute. I want to hear others.
You go ahead and then I'll talk on that.
Yeah. Let me answer Professor Tawfiq's question. It is yes and no. The sanctions that were imposed on Myanmar in 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, it was terrible for Myanmar. It pushed back Myanmar economically when in 50s and 60s, Myanmar was about to take off because of its own agriculture and other resources. So it did a huge disservice to the country. So when we look at sanctions, I think it worked really well on Myanmar, and that's why they were desperate. The generals, they realized the whole world is getting connected and putting them in an enclave, and that's why they deceived the rest of the world, saying that here is a democracy where you should be looking at. So that's a very strategic deception they did. But if you think of sanctions and its impact of today, it could be extremely fatal for the country and the people, because the people have also got taste of getting linked up with the whole world. So that we should keep that as perspective, and we'll see how that happened if the sanctions comes into play eventually after the ICJ gives the verdict. So floor is open.
Yeah, I have 2-3 points to make.
Sir,
as against the.
Can we go with Brigadier Shaukat and then Dr. Joshi?
Yeah, just 2-3 points I want to flag.
Brigadier Shaukat can go because there is sound of Azan in my neighborhood.
Okay. Sorry. I just want to raise an issue which is, in fact, counter the issue which has been raised by the professor from India. If we think that a particular subnational thrown out of his own country and then get resettled in another country, then this will be a phenomenon all over the world, including, my dear sir, let me tell you, including India. It will be a phenomenon that minor subnationals will be thrown out of the motherland and they will be picked up by somebody in somewhere in some island. One. Second is the very fact, the suggestion that if we absorb locally, this gives another indication that Myanmar can throw rest of the Rohingyas inside Bangladesh, and they say that it has been proven that these people are not Myanmar, but they have come from Bangladesh. We are in difficulty and even suggesting this thing. And as far as I know, Mr. Shahidullah's pet subject is the Bashanchor. Sir, I differ. You take 1 lakh people in Bashanchor, what happens to the rest? And then what are we giving indication? The indication is that we are absorbing in a better life, as we say, these Rohingyas. Therefore, the Myanmar will be under no pressure. This is what my humble observation.
Thank you, sir.
Let me make a quick response.
Just 1 minute. Just 1 minute. We would like to. We have a time limitations. I know it's a very fascinating discussion.
See, I want to make a quick response. 1 minute.
Just 1 minute. Just 1 minute, sir. We would like to wind up in 5 minutes. And then our distinguished Vice Chancellor will speak, and there'll be closing remarks. And before that, I will share with you my takeaway. So yes, is that Professor Kebjan?
Yeah. 30 seconds only. 30 seconds.
Okay,
only.
Please go ahead.
Okay, I am under no circumstances I am representing India's interest here. I am speaking as a scholar on my, let's say, individual capacity. And coming to my earlier point, I'm not saying that local integration should be the only course of action. I'm not saying that repatriation should be the only course of action. I'm saying that there is no guarantee, and it's unrealistic that 100% of this population will go back and will turn back to Myanmar. Therefore, we should be looking at comprehensive package whereby including all different options. I'm not saying at all that one thing is better than the other. I'm saying that all options should be available on the table, including local integration and repatriation.
Let me
Thank
join.
you. Thank you, Professor. Just a minute. Just a minute.
Yes, yes.
Mr. Kipken,
Doctor, I think what
nobody.
Doctor keep. Sorry, sir. Go ahead. Shall I offer
আমি একটু বলে নি Professor Kemen, no one is sort of thinking you as a representative of the Indian government. We fully appreciate your academic freedom and the three options that you have put forward. It is also something United States invented in terms of settling the refugee crisis. We are aware of that, and we appreciate and we fully appreciate that you want Bangladesh to look at all possible options, including the strategic options, I hope. Yes, Professor Ashraf.
Thank you, sir. I think what Dr. Kipgen said is a very standard textbook solution that comes from the UNHCR, that you try with multiple options for a durable solution. You try with repatriation, resettlement, and relocation. All these things sound very nice. But I think that Bangladesh should also project to the international community that we have been the good guy for many years. And maybe it is time to also explore to give a flavor of the bad guys. I mean, what I'm saying is that, we have been committed to Lucas policy, and we thought that engaging Myanmar diplomatically in a constructive manner would be a nicer way than even floating the Rohingya issue in the bilateral and BIMSTEC forums. We have not done it. And also, we have not even used the word Rohingya by respecting Myanmar's wish for many years. And I think time has come also to explore the Turkish option. What is the Turkish option? Turkey has deliberately used coercive force to enter into the territory of Syria to create a safe zone, and also relocate and forcefully repatriate the Syrian refugees. Bangladesh has been a good guy, and it is likely to remain a good guy. But I think that this should also come to the floor as an option, and we should also explore how feasible it is going to be, because I don't see Myanmar to voluntarily create a secure and safe conditions, but I think it should be explored at least. And also, Bhasanchar option comes because my reading is that Bangladesh is very impatient to see that the tourist-prone Cox's Bazar is becoming, the economic security is at stake. So a planned relocation of some 1 lakh Rohingyas to Bhasanchar might enable the government and the international community. But I don't know. I'm not backing it, but my understanding is that relocation is coming up as an option, at least for the time being.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's what I said. Fifth dimension. I said fifth dimension.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Anyone feels very strongly to take the floor at this stage for 30 seconds?
Yeah. Just one thing I would like to say, Professor Tawfiq said about the embargo. Mr. Shahid already actually said that how embargo worked, and it has definitely, impact the Myanmar's economy, and that is why the Myanmar military regime, they actually wanted to end the embargo. So what options actually remain for us, for Bangladesh? Can we have a military conflict with Myanmar? No. Can we integrate all these 1.2 million Rohingya in our society? No. So ultimately, and the bilateral agreement is not working. So we have actually a couple of options, as I mentioned. Number one is a multilateral pressure and a big sanction. The Myanmar people is getting the benefit of the withdrawal of the embargo, and ultimately they should realize that they are living in a civilized world. They shouldn't, allow their government and military to conduct, or continue the ethnic cleansing and genocide against an ethnic minority. And Mr. Kipgen, actually, you see, we didn't see this.
Thank you, Joshim. I think we have to close in now. I do not think anyone has a very burning question. Before I give the floor to Professor Atikul Islam, our Vice Chancellor, let me sort of share with you takeaway. One is that although frustrating and disappointing, it looks like that the election is unlikely to bring in any change in the Rohingya crisis. And I think status quo is the objective of Myanmar. So that's one. It looks like it will also be business as usual for most of the investors and business people. And Aung San Suu Kyi, despite her reduced popularity globally, will still be a child of democracy or daughter of democracy, whatever you want to call. Illiberal democracy will flourish like many other countries. Peace building, R2P, the alternatives that we talked about, and in terms of geopolitics, I think evolving Indo-Pacific strategy and BRI strategy will play out to certain extent, addressing the Rohingya crisis. And in the whole exercise, Bangladesh has to really place itself in the center to maneuver things in its favor. And that's why it needs a persistence, consistent, evolving diplomatic strategy to make sure that it comes in the right way in terms of addressing the Rohingya crisis, not go in terms of any status quo. So that's the brief takeaway. I know our colleagues will put together a policy paper which will be shared. So we'll see how it evolves. I think it has been an extremely interesting, fascinating, open discussions, especially from our colleagues from India and Canada and other places, and include especially our diaspora voice, which is extremely critical. So thank you very much from my side, but there will be a formal Thanksgiving speech by a coordinator, Professor Ishrat. At this stage, may I request our distinguished Vice Chancellor, Professor Atikul Islam, who has been very patiently listening to us for almost 2 hours. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you.
স্যার আপনার ক্যামেরাটা একটু অন করে নেন যদি।
Let's all panelists put on the camera, please.
Thank you, Ambassador Shoaibul Haq. I had an old professor, Professor A.S. Carrington. He was the Dean of Business at New South Wales University in Australia. He used to say the idea of going to a conference or a seminar is because you are confused, you go there to get a clear guidance. But the reality is that you come out of it even more confused. So I came here with all the experts that will have, I'll learn something that I'll know which way things are going. But it looks like we all have different solutions and the overlap between them is not that great. This Rohingya problem has been a vexing one for not only us, but for the whole world. The problem with the advanced democracies and some large democracies like Brazil and others, is that they profess to have some values of human rights, values of citizenship, values of neutrality, values of secularism. But the unfortunate thing is when national interest and self-interest comes on the way, they seem to veer from those values or rather keep safe distance from those values. We have newly emerging democracies and non-democracies that all are vying for world power and hegemony. And they say one thing: we're your friends, we'll solve it, trust on us. And in the dark, I wouldn't say of night, they would sit with the Myanmar generals and the leader, so-called champion of democracy, who tried to plead for the war criminals in the ICJ. So they will have some sort of meetings and connivance there, and they'll tell us the right thing, the politically correct thing that we want to hear also. I believe that we cannot rely on sanctions unless those sanctions are from all important nations at the same time. America and Canada give some sanctions. Europe, doesn't join them. India and other countries not part of it. That kind of sanction doesn't work. This is no. There is no sort of use in enunciating principles from United Nations that this should be done, that should be done, that should be done, this is bad, that is bad, and not to enforce or not to really go for what they believe in to implement that there. So that has been another problem. Let us be realistic. We cannot say, we also want to be politically correct. We cannot say who is playing what role sometimes openly, but we know who is playing what role. We know whose national interest is there and in what way, what they want. At the end, it may come, if we really want these people to go back or a solution, even if they have to have find a third country, we may have to choose between our friends. We have friends theoretically, always say soothing words to us. We have friends that want to develop our relationships with them. But can we rely on, they will not work together. Can we rely on one of them who will go the whole hog for us and do something? I think a time will come when we'll have no other option but to jump this way or that way. And when it comes to jumping between BRI or the other one, the Pacific one, India-Pacific one, I don't know, because we have, on both sides we've got friends, and on both sides we will have apparent friends who are not really friends. So we got to make a choice at some stage and see the best that we can do. If the whole world basically do not help us on this, knowing what's the right thing to do, knowing what's the ethical thing to do, knowing what's the moral thing to do, if the world has got no conscience, we will suffer, but then we have to find our own way. And alternatives, you have sort of nicely extolled all the various possible positions. And at least we can see clearer now. We may not have come to a decision, but this discussion has shed so much of light on the issue. It's time to basically now sit down and see, okay, what are the things that we've discussed and what we can take away from here? What policy prescriptions we can advocate with the government of Bangladesh and with the international communities. I am extremely happy that this webinar took place at North-South University. I thank the organizers for it, and I look forward to having some more interesting seminars, not only on this issue, but all other sort of issues that Sheikh Tawfiq and Ambassador Hawk organizes from time to time. I really learn things and I enjoy them. Thank you so much. All the participants from other countries, our gratitude towards you. Let us keep talking and see if we can find a way. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Very rightly said that we need to be pragmatic and while realistic. So, absolutely. Thank you very much for your encouraging word. With this, may I hand it over to Professor Ishat Sultana, coordinator of CPS, to conclude this session. Over to you, madam.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Shahidul Haq, for running an excellent session. Although I'm supposed to thank all of you and end the event, I can't but share a few of my thoughts generated by the interesting and insightful discussion that we had today. I think one of the key problems lies with not recognizing genocide as genocide. And Ambassador Shahid rightly reaffirmed that committing genocide can't be called a mistake. We frequently suggest Bangladesh to create a global pressure on Myanmar to take the Rohingya people back to their homeland with dignity and safety. But as long as Myanmar's neighbor countries do not recognize it as genocide, why and how should they stand beside Bangladesh on this issue? That's why they prefer to strengthen Myanmar, but I would also say that a time has come that the diplomatic strategies of Bangladesh need to be revisited. Exercising militarized democracy, I think, is linked to prioritizing economic progress over humanity in Myanmar. And although it is very difficult to be optimistic on Rohingya issue, as academicians, researchers, and practitioners, we want to continue to remain optimistic. Organizing this event was the little effort on the reflection of our optimism. Respected panelists, thank you very, very much for a very lively and insightful discussion. I appreciate all of your time and particularly those who joined from different time zones. Special thanks to our moderator who very skillfully kept us engaged and focused on the discussion today through his wonderful moderation. Finally, thanks to the Vice Chancellor of North-South University. Sir, you have been a source for encouragement and inspiration for CPS, and that's why we feel courage to organize these kind of events to share our knowledge. And thanks to all audience for staying with us for the last 2 hours. We hope to see you all again on another occasion, and we'll definitely share the policy briefs that you're going to prepare based on the discussion today. Stay safe and take care. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye bye.
Thank you so much.
নাসর ভাই জেগে থাকার জন্য ধন্যবাদ।
I could do it, sir. Thank you.